Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I commend the member for Fowler for his contribution to this important debate. I also happy to speak on this Social Services Legislation Amendment, Youth Employment and Other Measures Bill, because like the member for Fowler, I'm happy to stand up for Australia's youth. Certainly, we see the Abbott government is not standing up for them by condemning them to a month without support. The Irish band U2 said that you glorify the past when the future dries up, and this Prime Minister personifies that attitude. He's not just a conservative, where he's trying to maintain the status quo, he's trying to take us backwards. He's regressive, trying to take, under this Prime Minister we see a tax on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community in terms of their budget, over $500 million cut from their budget, in terms of his treatment of the workplaces, of the opportunity that Australia should be providing as we develop. This Prime Minister is taking us backward, and particularly when it comes to the youth, targeting the most vulnerable in our community. And sadly, young people too often fall into that category. We see youth unemployment nationally currently around 14%, but, Deputy Speaker, sadly in Queensland we see youth unemployment is currently higher than the national average at 14.3%. Particularly high in a couple of areas. I note in Cairns we see youth unemployment. It's a particular problem up there. Sadly, we see Australia's Northern Australia, the Abbott government's Northern Australia policy is going to actually make it easier for people on backpacker visas and the like to go into those areas when we've got high youth unemployment. I'm hoping that's something that, with your support, we'll be able to nuance so that we don't take jobs away from young North Queenslanders. I'm sure you'll do that, Deputy Speaker. In 2014, there were 56,800 long-term unemployed young people aged between 15 and 24 in Australia. That's the context in which we need to see this legislation. Legislation put forward by an out-of-touch government that seems to think that it is necessary to provide a disincentive so that young people will not become disengaged and reliant on government-provided support. The government sees no link between, on one hand, the amount of youth who are out of work and, the other hand, the lack of jobs. The many people that I see in my electorate of Moreton, they're good, eager, hard-working kids looking for an opportunity. They definitely want to work. And that's not just my view. There have been surveys undertaken by credible groups such as Mission Australia which back that up. They say that the majority of young people want to find a job. So put aside what the right-wing radio shock jocks are saying. The youth of today are the same as youth have always been, a little bit different from those in their middle ages or older. They're a bit different, but they're still keen. They're keen to make their mark. That is not easy for this is not easy for the young people of today with these long-term unemployment issues, and there are lots of other barriers to them obtaining a job. As I said, there aren't many jobs available. We've got unemployment at the moment at 6%, but the Treasurer's own budget papers say that the unemployment will rise to 6.5%. That's what the government is saying in its own budget papers. That'll mean it's harder for young people to grab a job. And we know there are not many full-time jobs available. Job security has decreased over time. We've got young people lacking the experience to get a job. The age-old problem, but also that employers are often unwilling to hire young people, or they have transport problems. And we see a government committed proudly to not investing in public transport in our cities that used most by young people to get to work. Unemployment for young people is significantly higher than for the general population and has been rising since 2008. So the government, through this bill, wants to put in place measures that are going to make it even harder for youth at a time in their life which is difficult already, when they are just making decisions as an adult with all the challenges that come with that. You know, we don't have the same initiation ceremonies that other communities have. It is a difficult rite of passage. Schoolies is not quite the rite of passage that perhaps sensible tribes would have. So this unfair piece of government legislation will change the eligibility for New Start. Youth aged between 22 and 24 will now not be eligible for the New Start allowance if they are unemployed. Those 22 to 24-year-old youth who want to work and cannot find employment will now be forced to apply for the youth allowance, an allowance that is designed for students. For an unemployed youth living away from home, this change in eligibility for New Start will mean that rather than receiving $519.20 each fortnight while they are trying to find work, they will now receive only $426.80 per fortnight. That change from $519 down to $426 is the difference between $37 per day, which anyone will testify is not a lot of money, down to $30 per day. And that's to pay for all living expenses, accommodation, food, medications, transport, and, heaven forbid, a young person might even want to have a little bit of relaxation time. That $30 per day. Now, I think the Treasurer pays more than that for his cigars. $30 a day is phenomenal. That $7 a day change for these youths could be the cost of a bus fare or a train ticket to go to an interview, or petrol to put in their car if they live in Gippsland to go and go for a job application. So the government, in its explanatory memorandum to this bill, says, and I quote, "The key aim of this measure is to provide incentives to young unemployed people to obtain the relevant education and training to increase employability." So one thing the explanatory memorandum does not explain is how these youth are to afford the education and training that the government clearly wants them to obtain. If the Education Minister Christopher Pyne's $100,000 degrees become reality, this will be even harder, and he seems determined to change the way equality and opportunity are rolled out in Australia. Now, not all youth want or need to be further trained. What they all do need is the support to be able to find a job. That means the ability to job hunt. Now, admittedly, online gives them some opportunities that they didn't have 50 years ago. But the reality is you still need to get in front of an employer, and that requires transport, which costs money. Money that youth on the lower youth allowance will not have if they're looking for a good job. As the Treasurer so kindly offered to them, if they want to be able to buy a house, particularly in Sydney where the median house price is about $900,000, they have to get a good job with a good wage. The other unfair provision this bill will introduce is a waiting period for new claimants of youth allowance who are job seekers, and that will commence in a year's time on the 1st of July 2016. Now, the Labor Party fought long and hard last year to stop this government leaving unemployed youth with nothing to live on for 6 months. I didn't hear a chorus of opposition from those opposite at that cruel policy. But now the government has realised, after action from ACOS and the Labor Party and all concerned people, grandparents who are concerned about this harsh policy being visited upon their grandchildren, now the governments want to leave them with nothing to live on for 1 month, for 30 days. If it's 1 month or 6 months, if you have nothing to live on, it is going to be extraordinarily difficult for our youth. How does the government expect these youth to feed themselves, to pay rent, to buy medication, and then to present themselves to interviews in such a way that they are attractive to a potential employer? And particularly if we are talking about young people who are in a strained relationship with their families. You cannot assume that all young people have parents who are willing and able to provide that sort of support. That is an arrogant assumption to make and doesn't reflect the current Australian Bureau of Statistics data on what families are in Australia. Because without parental support, these youth will be living on fresh air for an entire month, or lining up at the soup kitchens. Is that the sort of policy we want in modern Australia? But the unfairness of this bill does not stop there. To become eligible for the youth allowance, these unemployed youth will have to jump through a further hoop. They will be subject to a new rapid activation strategy called Rapid Connect Plus. The government is demanding that they undertake additional job search activities during the 4-week period before they receive any income support. At the very time that these youth will have no income support whatsoever, the government is asking them to undertake more job search activities. How would the people of the Geelong area find it if they sent these children out to not only have no money but also have to go out and look for a job, particularly at a time when manufacturing is collapsing under this government? Manufacturing that was once the lifeblood of the Corangamai and Geelong areas now collapsing under this government because they don't support manufacturing in the long term. This bill is punitive, cruel and unusual punishment. It will punish youth who cannot find work. Why should these youth be disadvantaged more than any other sector of our society? Why are they not afforded the same basic standard of living that our government will give to every other citizen? This government is forcing our youth into poverty. These measures are unjustified and will cause immense hardship. This government has no plan to increase jobs, no plan to help these youth get a job, just a plan to punish them and undermine any confidence that they may have had. Labor is committed to ensuring young people find work through support, through training, through work experience and through incentives. Labor wants our youth, who are our future, to succeed, but we also understand that this is difficult in the current job climate and that our youth need our support and understanding, not misplaced value judgments and punishment that have rolled straight out of the right-wing radio shock jocks. Labor will support education and training for our youth. I visited a youth training centre in my electorate of Moreton recently. The Phoenix Development Group at Rocklea offers traineeships in warehousing in a fully functional warehouse with on-site classrooms. The students there obtain a Certificate 3 on completion of the traineeship. The Phoenix Development Group brokers pathways to success for Indigenous Australians and other minority groups, as well as youth disengaging from schooling and the long-term unemployed, and also they have a special focus on people that have disabilities. They've got training facilities, particularly for people that are visually impaired. So their goal, the Phoenix Development Group's goal, is so that their students, on completion of their courses, will be empowered individuals and able to live independent of their welfare system. The students I met there a week or so ago were keen to get out into the employment system, keen to get out there and meet employers and become independent. That is the recipe for youth success: training, and education and support, not the humiliation and punishment that the Abbott government is imposing through this bill. There is one measure in this bill that Labor will not oppose, however, I should stress, and we won't oppose the ceasing of the low-income supplement. Labor will always be fiscally responsible where measures are fair and socially just. So far, Labor has announced support for more than $2 billion in budget savings. The Labor Party calls on the government to split this bill. If the government does not split this bill, then Labor will oppose this bill in its entirety. These measures will not assist youth to get jobs. It may, in fact, prevent them from gaining work. It is unfair, it is cruel. This legislation will not decrease the levels of welfare dependency. Instead, it will force our youth into poverty. Labor will always stand up for youth and oppose such unfair measures.